All right, can I ask Rob my question?
Sure.
Okay, I just want to be sure. Do you think, Rob, do you think gender and sex are identical?
I think that gender is the grammatical categorization of sex.
So is that a yes?
Well, it depends. I would say that for all intents and purposes, yes. But I guess you could say that because one has to do with grammar and the other doesn't, that there is a difference in the utility of the terms in that sense, the grammatical sense.
Sure, the utility question is a different question.
Disagree with that.
So I do.
Agree. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, so I do have an argument for you if you do think they're identical. So if gender isn't different than sex, then it is logically impossible for gender to be different than sex. But it's not logically impossible for gender to be different than sex. Therefore, gender is different than sex. Is there a premise there you disagree with?
Yeah,
I can put in.
I guess you have to slow down because it seems circular and not to make sense to me.
Yeah, sure. I'll put
in my opinion.
That's using modal terms that makes it not apply.
Please stop fucking interrupting.
I pause when he talks.
So I put it in.
They were having an exchange between two people. Please mind that.
I apologize.
Go ahead, Brandon.
Yeah, so I did put it in the private chat there if you want to take a look at it.
Sure, let me take a look. Sure.
Yeah, if you do think they're identical, right? Because I think a lot of this debate is a semantic dispute, but I think you're going to put a big burden on yourself if you're going to make a claim like that.
Okay, so let me read this. You tell me. If gender isn't different than sex, so they're the same thing, then it's logically impossible for gender to be different than sex. So if they're not different, then they can't be different. Okay. Exactly. It's not logically impossible for gender to be different than sex. Okay, explain that premise.
Yeah, so there isn't a contradiction that's entailed from gender being different than sex.
But that's just the way. Of course there is.
Okay, so what's the contradiction?
The contradiction is all of the reasons that I argue the descriptive of is that gender's just a grammatical way to discuss sex, and the reason that it ought to be. Both of those things prove the point.
We're not talking about ought.
But your argument. Well, I talked about it real quick.
Real quick, because we're not talking about ought, right? And if you do think it's logically impossible, I just want the proposition and its negation that's entailed from the proposition that gender isn't different than sex. Can you derive that contradiction?
Yes. Sex is adult, or sex is the descriptor of. Gender is the grammatical descriptor of sex. Therefore, there can't be a disconnect for the two. The two are the same. Your critique could literally be offered of any term about anything ever. In fact, it could be offered about the very nature of reality, because I could say it is not a logical impossibility that all of us right now are just brains in a vat and this is all simulation. And actually the term sex doesn't even exist. A simulation programmed that term into our brain today. Isn't that logically possible that could be the case? Would you agree with that, Brandon?
Yeah, sure. So you're granting the argument as sound.
No, so therefore.
Okay, so which premise? So which premise do you disagree with? Premise one or premise two?
If you let me finish, then you'll hear. Therefore, you would say that we are never able to say there are any exclusionary definitions of any term ever, because hypothetically there could be a world where that has been imprinted in our mind by androids or something like that. That's your argument?
This message is sponsored in part by...
I apologize for the interruption, but Mr. sent in a big 50 on Cash App and said, horse lady video. So there you go, Mr. I hope you enjoy. Thank you for the Cash App. I appreciate you. My apologies, Brandon. I did cut off whatever you were going to respond with.
Yeah, no worries. I just don't understand why I'm being asked questions, right? I'm trying to figure out which premise you disagree with. It sounds like you granted the first premise, you disagree with the second premise, right? So if you disagree with the second premise, then some sort of contradiction is going to be entailed from the proposition gender isn't different than sex. I'm waiting for the proposition.
I'll play this game, right? I disagree with premise one. Nothing's logically impossible because theoretically anything's possible.
Oh, okay. So it is the case that the sky is blue, and it's also not the case that the sky is blue. That's logically possible?
Correct, because we could have it imprinted in our book.
Shit.
Yes, that's the absurdity of the position you're making. You're
No,
telling me.
you
No, I just want to be. I just want to be clear.
Are you a
here.
dialetheist? Do you think true contradictions can exist? That's your view?
Welcome to criticizing your own position. Thank you very much.
It's not my position. You just said that there can be true contradictions, right?
That's correct.
How it's typically understood in classical logic is that contradictions are impossible. So on your view, contradictions can be true.
Yes, that's correct. That is correct.
Okay,
Based
on
no,
that's fine. No, that's fine.
That's thank you. You can be quiet and listen to me explain, or you can continue to be glib. So I'll answer the position for you. When we got to the reductive nature of, you said technically anything's true because we could be brains in a vat that had anything put in. Well, if that's true, if that's your belief, then there's no reason that anything ever should be able to be impossible, because the very nature of reality and what we think is possible and impossible is based on the assumption of the objective things we could see. If all things are possible because we literally could be in a simulation, then that means that something could be contradictory and not contradictory at the same time. Now, if we your criticism,
my position, to be clear,
that is your position.
This is just gift of the gab nonsense.
It's not. That's what you're doing, right? And so when
how is that what I'm doing? I gave you an argument.
Saying when it comes,
I gave you an argument, and you had to say that there are true contradictions, right? That's your view. Anybody listening to this is going to think, oh, Rob thinks contradictions can be true. That's fucking insane. Nobody's going to think that you look like a normal person, a sane person in this conversation.
So again,
well, I mean, I've seen the red sky, so
please. Premise 2 is it's not logically impossible for gender to be different than sex. And when I get to it, and I'm like, but it is in this sense because I've defined what gender is. You basically default to, but words could literally mean anything. In fact, we could be in a simulation, so any word could mean anything. Therefore, it is not logically impossible because infinite possibilities exist, particularly when it comes to language. And
so the argument's sound.
Please,
you're granting the argument sound when you say that. So it's a sound argument. You agree that gender is different than sex. You just conceded the whole debate proposition.
I did not.
You just did. You just okay.
I can't believe, like, if you might learn something if you listen. So let me slow it down for you, and please don't interrupt. If it's true that we grant premise 2 that it's not logically impossible for gender to be different than sex, because all terms in language are infinite possibilities, and that we could literally be in a simulation where words could possibly mean whatever they want. If that's true, and that's why we say we grant premise 2, then it disproves premise 1. Because using that same rationale, when you say if gender isn't different than sex, then it's logically impossible for gender to be different than sex, your answer to why premise 2 should be granted is all things are possible, because we could be in a simulation.
That doesn't follow.
If all things are possible, then that means that
nobody said all things are possible. You're just making that up. Nobody said that.
You literally said that the reason that we should grant premise 2 is because language could mean anything. We could be in a simulation, et cetera, et cetera. Then why could premise 2? Give me examples of when premise 2 could be true.
All premise 2 is saying is that there isn't a contradiction entailed from the proposition gender isn't different than sex. That's all premise 2 is saying.
That's not
true.
You granted
it. You granted it's a sound argument.
That's not true. That's
the argument
not
goes
true.
through.
There is a contradiction because I define them as the same. So the way that I define the terms means that there is no light between them. That it is that it is logically impossible.
Okay, so let's write it down. What do you mean when you say the word sex?
Gender.
Period. And what do you mean when you say gender?
Sex.
Period.
Very informative, Rob. Very good job.
And which is which?
Sex is, I'll explain it for the millionth time. I said, as long as we're not talking about there's a difference because one is the grammatical expression of the other, then yes, it would be an impossibility to say that there's a difference between the two. Because the word literally means sex, which is biological reality, male, female, and then gender, which is the grammatical expression of biological reality, male, female. So if you want to argue, well, the grammatical difference means that there's technically a difference, I said I would grant that. Other than that, no, they're the same. You haven't offered any reason why my interpretation is wrong. You're just said, hypothetically, is it true that there could be, it's not impossible that there could be a difference. That's true, hypothetically, because we could say language is socially constructed, we're in a simulation, etc. You're like, yeah, that's what I'm saying. Therefore, I win. And I'm like, but if we take that to the logical extension, it disproves premise one, because if anything's possible, because words could have malleable meanings, theoretically, they could. Like, for example, every word that you said
still
there.
Going. He's still going.
That's right. I am, because I'm disproving your point.
Going.
Is it possible that if could mean something totally different than what you think it means? Is that possible?
It depends on who's using the word. Sure.
What do you mean it depends? Is it possible or not? Yes or no?
It's logically possible.
Okay, the next word you use is gender. Is it possible that gender means something different than what you used?
Yes.
Is it possible that the next word is something possibly different than what you use?
None of this entails a contradiction, sure.
Sure,
and you agree with that. You agree with that, by the way.
Again, I'll finish.
You
with
already
this.
granted it.
What it proves is that you can't say anything.
All of this jibber jabber isn't helping you.
And
You already said
let me spare you, Rob. Brandon, you got 5 minutes in the back, along with 5 vibes back there as